Hi everyone, welcome to the GDC Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis. I am the invisible voice inside your head. I'm here as always, checking out interesting games and talking with the folks who worked on them. For those who are not familiar with the GDC Twitch channel, welcome. This is a place we are tied to Game Developers Conference. Like I said just a second ago, we try to take this opportunity to check out new and interesting games that are on the market. Talk to the people who made them, and hopefully answer some questions for folks in chat who are curious about how they got made. In the lower left-hand corner of the screen, I am joined by Bert Beeckman of Forgotten Empire. Bert, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And the game we are playing today, in case you haven't figured it out already, is Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. You might say, Bryant, this isn't a new game. This is a very old game. This is from 1999. And I would go, you're right. But earlier this year, the folks at Forgotten Empire and Microsoft worked together to put out a definitive edition for Age of Empires 2 that includes content from the original game, content from the expansion Age of Conquerors, content from the HD edition, and a new expansion, I think, for this game. That's what you mentioned earlier, Bert?
Yes, indeed. Actually, I think there's like 5 expansions currently packed into this one alongside the base game. So yeah, pretty big amount of content in here.
Yeah, so it makes it wild because it means Age of Empires 2 has sort of been in development for over 2 decades. That means 2019, 2000s? Yeah, like it's been 20 years of Age of Empires 2.
Yeah, indeed.
I picked the Saladin campaign to do a brief mission in because this is one of the first campaigns. One of my favorite things about Age of Empires 2 as a game when I was a kid was this game got me through history class. It got me through a bunch of things that I would have otherwise thought they were boring because I could play it in this game, Age of Empires. Bert, I guess I should be asking, did you have a similar experience with Age of Empires back in the 90s, and how did you and your team get started on working with Microsoft on this? Those two questions aren't linked. I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to make a segue happen.
Well, it's actually they are actually kind of linked because a lot of the people on the team at Forgotten Empires are actually longtime fans of the game. We played Age of Empires 2, most of us as kids. We kind of grew up with it, and then we all kind of came back at the same time and formed this team. Now, how we kind of got involved with Age of Empires 2 is that we all started actually modding the game. I think that was in 2011, 2012, around that time period. Mm-hmm. And we started looking at Age of Empires 2 at the time. There was no active development on the game. We kind of were like, okay, this is very interesting. There's all kinds of people who played the game when they were a kid. And now they're coming back to this game and developing all kinds of modding tools. Hey, we want to make something cool with that. So we started to look into like what are the possibilities, and there was one thing that was not done at that point, which was adding new civilizations to the game. So we, fiddled around a bit, and then after some time we managed to add a new civilization to the game. And we're like, okay, we can make like a new expansion or something. Adding new civilizations was never done at that point as a mod. So yeah, we made a mod. It was all good. We brought it out. We put it on our website. We put it on our website at Christmas Eve, which in hindsight was a terrible idea. But at the time we thought, okay, that's great, because we're going to give the fans and people who are looking forward to this mod a nice Christmas present. And we were like, yeah, if we're going to have, let's say, 20,000 downloads in lifetime downloads, that would be great. The problem was we had 20,000 downloads in, I think, the first hour. Website went down. It was Christmas Eve, as I said before, so yeah, nobody was around to help us there. So yeah, all in all, very, very weird and hectic launch of the mod. But eventually the mod got really popular, and I think we had like a lifetime amount of downloads of 1 million downloads, I believe, which was way more than we ever dreamt of. And at the same time, Microsoft was also looking at HD edition. So we reached out to Microsoft and we were like, hey, you guys are showing interest again in the franchise, in the series, and we just made this mod that really did well. Is there some way that we can cooperate? And we did. We started to work on more expansions for the HD edition then at the time. and then we started to work on the definitive editions as well. So yeah, we really grew on Age of Empires, and we basically built around it as well.
Right on. Apologies for folks in chat. I have something of a cold, so I'm trying to muscle through today's stream. I was gonna I'm trying to catch my coughing and keep it off mic, but apologies if I'm coughing in your ear. Quick shout out for folks in chat. We are going to take questions, so if you're someone like Aqualunte, Tilanus, Lurker Sauce, or Roboboro, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to know what questions you have for Berts, and if you'd like to know more about how this game got made. Bert, my first question for you then, sort of talking about the transition, diving into that transition from modders to full-time game developers. How did that transition itself happen once you guys started talking to Microsoft? Like, when did you and your friends sort of go from becoming a group of modders to becoming like professional developers with what I assume is an office and a studio? And what was that process like?
It's been a very gradual process. Because we have been working on those expansions for quite some time, it really allowed us to grow slowly and at our own pace. So it was not like, okay, we're now hired, we now need to start a studio, we need to get people together, all in a matter of months or weeks. No, we literally had years to slowly build up, and that was actually really good, because Age of Empires is a slow game, but we as a studio also like to take it relatively easy going in a way. Like, we don't want to take crazy risks or do crazy things, but take it gently, and that really allowed us to make intelligent decisions and in growing as a studio. Now the thing is, we're actually a virtual studio. Mm-hmm. We do have some smaller local presences, but overall most of the people are working from home or working from like shared offices. So that's kind of how we're still doing it at this point.
Oh, nice. I should have. And then actually Lurker Sauce brought that up in chat. Right on. Well, just to talk about dive into the definitive edition. You already worked on an HD edition, and obviously I know that there's a definitive edition for Age of Empires 1 and Age of Empires 2. What did you see as sort of the temples for a definitive edition? What it would need to entail? Like, what were sort of the project goals of that separated it from the prior HD edition you've done?
So back in the day, if you look at the HD edition, the main goal of that was, okay, let's bring Age of Empires back to the players. There were a lot of people who had not played, who still has a CD player in their laptop, for example. Those are all things that, people like H2, but they had no idea how to play it. And that was kind of the goal of the HD edition, to bring it back to the players. And it kind of grew on that. Like, we brought more content because there was clearly a very strong demand from the community. Like, hey, we want more. H2, we definitely want more. But then when the definitive editions were made, it was more than, okay, let's just bring back H2. Let's actually the whole project goal from within Microsoft and from us as well was, okay, we need to make the best H2 possible. That was the intent here. So it was a very, very different approach. Instead of just bringing it back, it was like, okay, let's make sure that everything we have at this point is further improved and is the best possible thing that we can make. That's really the big difference, and that kind of manifests itself in many ways as well. If you look at the graphics, if you put them side by side, you can really see, okay, this was the 90s and this is no longer the 90s. Like, you just see it on the screen here as well, like buildings now beautifully collapse and come crumbling down, or we have the kind of, how do you call that, like the smoke that comes out of the barrel of the cannon as it fires a cannonball. Mm-hmm. Those are all like little details that were not in the original game. And that really, make it look a lot prettier. With that said, like, literally every asset in the game has been remade, which was not the case in the HD edition. In the HD edition, all the graphics were the original graphics, but the resolution was just scaled up. So your viewport was like bigger, larger, but it was still the same sprites. And now you have much higher quality sprites as well.
Mm-hmm. Man, what was the process of remaking an entire game's worth of assets for you and your team, especially for like a remote work from home team? Like, I assume I assume for not a large amount of people, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, so this is where we also had the chance to work together with other studios. The oversight, the art oversight and the art direction, that's something that we all did in-house. And that was all done by FE in cooperation with Microsoft. But a lot of the assets work was luckily done by a partner studio that helped us out. Now, with that said, it was still a crazy amount of work. When we started this and we made the list of assets that we actually had to remake, it was like, okay, this is not just one game we're remaking, this is 6 games worth of assets that we're making, which is an insane amount. And it also took ages to actually redo all those. But and also actually, we didn't have any of the original assets. Those were all lost. So literally, we had no choice but to make everything from scratch. But other than that, it was just, yeah, 2 things that were on our side. One thing was definitely that we had the original art, and one of the things that we really want to stick to was, okay, if people have been recognizing this specific unit as being a camel, as you can see on the screen now, these camels, we want to make sure that somebody still recognizes that unit as a camel 20 years later. So we didn't really have to go around and redesign all those assets. It was more like, okay, we kind of have it here. It might only be 100 pixels high. Now it's like, I don't know, 4 times the fidelity. We need to imagine what all those pixels in between look like. But as an overall view, you kind of know what unit is going to look like. And that really helped in speeding up that process. It helped us, stick to the original design and then, try to just bring that back as good as possible.
Right on. Oh no, go on.
No, I actually forgot my train of thought there, so sorry.
It's okay. From that point on, moving on from the individual assets, I guess my next question would be, it would be foolish of me to say that you could just copy and paste the original code from the game, the original programming and logic to make it work one-to-one in your new software. What was the process for rebuilding the scripting and the sort of the AI, a lot of the logic that made Age of Empires what it was?
Well, I don't know how technical I can get here, but there were a few challenges here. So we did have the code, we did have the original code to work from, and luckily because of HD, we could also start from HD, which was set up more recently. However, the biggest issue, and that was also an issue that HD actually had issues with, is that if you take a game that was compiled back in the 90s and now you take it and recompile it again with the latest settings, not everything will be exactly the same. There were a lot of places where we noticed that the way you compile the game kind of defines behavior. Okay, there's an uninitialized variable. How does the compiler handle with that? Deal with that? And the reason I'm saying that is because all of a sudden you recompile the game, you make not a single change, but all of a sudden it plays differently. And that you also need to account for. And that was especially visible in, for example, pathfinding. You can take the pathfinding from 1999, just compile the code again, do nothing new to it, and the pathfinding is slightly different. And especially for, you have a very big passionate community still for Age of Empires 2, they will definitely notice that, hey, this is different. What are you guys doing? And we're like, yeah, nothing yet, but it's still different.
Yeah.
So then you need to go back in there and look at the pathfinding code and make it better. Which we also did. We also went into pathfinding and went a bit more thorough. But yeah, for engineering, it was also not just, okay, it's different right from the bat, but also a lot of things that were true in 90s coding are no longer true in 2020 or 2019 coding. Coding standards have changed, back practices have changed. What is now efficient for hardware might not be efficient anymore. So yeah, it's not like you were handed a game it still worked, but the kind of intricacies and efficiencies from it no longer work or no longer true.
Right on. Going to chat real quick. We got folks like Razucano 3000 commenting that we need unique units for each civ. That sounds like a lot of work.
That is.
That sounds like a ton of work. I don't know. Like I like games like Warcraft that have unique units for every civ, but they still they keep things analogous. And then I like how Age of Empires does it too. I like that there's all the basic units and then the unique units.
There's also a bit of an issue there. Like we definitely talked about it, but there's two big things to consider there. One thing is, of course, that we have now 11 different architecture sets. 35 civilizations, but 11 architecture sets. Let's assume that we're not going per civ, but per architecture sets.
Yeah.
Then still, all of a sudden, you have 10 times as many units that you need to recognize, which make things a lot more complicated. One of the beauties of Age of Empires 2 is that you see the unit and you know what it is. And that's very, very important in RTS games. But I can quite imagine if you have all of a sudden 10 times the amount of units, it's much, much harder to do that, let alone with 35 different sets of units.
Yeah.
Not to mention it's a lot more assets, and that will take a lot more memory space and hard disk space. Because it's one of those things as well. This game is still 2D. A lot of people think that it's actually 3D now, but it's still 2D sprites. Because we really wanted to keep that old feel, but at the same time that's also very, very heavy on computers. Like, okay, it's a lot of space that is taken on your hard disk for all those sprites, all those facets. So yeah, there's a few considerations before we can look at individual unit skins.
Right on. Moving on, Lurker Sauce has some interesting insight. The initial size of Age of Empires 2 DE and beta was 60 gigabytes. You managed to half that in compression and split the 4K support in DLC. That's true. I'm sorry we're not playing with the 4K support today. My machine is by the, it can do the best it can. I wanted to make sure we had the best image quality for the stream. Because unfortunately at 4K we might have had some trouble. But yeah, what was what was your process for and decision-making process for including that 4K support, and how did you work to the point of including it as DLC instead of making it a main feature of the game?
That's a really interesting question, actually. So when we started working on this, one of the ideas was, okay, Age of Empires 2 has been going on for 20 years. We want to make sure it can go on for another 20 years. And then you just have to add 4K graphics. There is, at this point, I think if you look at Steam hardware survey, a lot of people are on HD or tiny above that. But it is slightly moving higher, and that will always keep on happening. So in 20 years, maybe 4K will be tiny, and then you want 4K graphics, especially in the 2D environment, because otherwise it just won't be readable. But indeed, as the chat mentioned as well, this came with a large, like an explosion in data size, asset size on your hard disk drive. And at some point, indeed, the AOE2 DE beta was 60 gigabytes. And then we saw, okay, with 60 gigabytes, a lot of people won't be able to run that, which is not the intent at all. We want people to play the game and have as wide range of computers that can play it as possible. And at that point, we're okay. We need to look further into compression, and I think we went down to, I would say, 30 gigabytes. So if you have everything installed, I think you're about 30 large at this point. And as the chat also just mentioned, we once were at the point where we had 120 gigabytes of data size just in the. Yeah, I think it was a pre-beta, but that was really, really big at that time. And then at that point, we really noticed, okay, this is larger than most AAA game coming out today. We really need to go hard and get that size down. And we did. At this point, you can say, okay, I'm just playing with the HD graphics. And then, yeah, it's much, much smaller. I would have to check the min spec and how small it exactly is, but yeah, we're in a much better position at this point.
Yeah, right on. As you can see in the stream, folks, I was about to go through more campaign missions, and then I remembered most of my time in Age of Empires 2 was spent just playing random games, usually 8 player games on islands, where I would usually just build a fortified island and use cheat codes to cheat codes to win the game, because I was just a kid and didn't know how to play this game very well. but I decided for the purposes of our stream to just boot up, just boot up a classic game and sort of see how it plays out in the new HD edition. Bert, we're going to move on to my next question, which has to do with the new factions and sort of the new historical baked-in thing. One of the coolest things about Age of Empires 2 for me as a kid was that it helped me learn more about civilizations that they don't teach you about in the American school system. I don't think you don't really get a lot of perspective on, say, Saladin and his campaign until you're in high school, but here I was, at age 11 in middle elementary school, getting to learn sort of about perspectives and people that I had never met before. What was your team's philosophy for building out the new factions, not just from a fun standpoint, but from kind of the historical standpoint that the series is known for?
Well, that's a massive question. I can probably fill a whole stream just answering that. But it's really interesting, actually. So civ design and how we kind of get to those civs and how we approach it, there's not really like a set process. When we start working on an expansion, and that we learned from one of our earlier expansions, actually, is we try to approach things regionally. Mm-hmm. I think we first did that with the African kingdoms, where we kind of focused on like the African history, and we kind of went to Southeast Asian history, and then now for the E edition, we're like, okay, what region is really interesting and we haven't covered yet? And then we went to Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the theme for the civs in this one. Now, at that point, we're like, okay, what civs from that region are interesting for Age of Empires? Mm-hmm. And that's always the most difficult discussion to have. At the beginning, it's always easy. You can say, okay, medieval civilization, British, Chinese, and everybody kind of knows those, and everybody is like, okay, that's quintessentially medieval stuff, and everybody can name something about those civilizations. But as soon as you get a bit more obscure, the questions become a bit harder. Like, okay, what exactly sets that apart? And then you look at a few things that make it really interesting. For example, we have the Tatars in the game. And if we think about the Tatars, we're like, okay, we have the story of Tamerlane. Mm-hmm. And that's a super interesting story to tell. So we're like, okay, even if the Tatars, I'm not saying they were not interesting, but even if the Tatars were not as known as, for example, the Chinese or the British, the story that we can tell in the campaigns is so interesting that we absolutely want those guys in. So that's one thing, but it can also be something else. For example, the Chinese, this is again an older civ with an example. You can say, okay, the Chinese have the Chukonu, their repeated crossbow. That's a very interesting weapon, and that's something that you absolutely want to have in the game. Mm-hmm. So it's always like, okay, what's an interesting facet of a civilization? And at that point, you kind of build around that. So it's not just one thing that makes us decide what makes it interesting, but always like, yeah, what are a few interesting things that we can start on, and then we start researching, we start building. The researching bit is always very interesting because we try to look at it from various perspectives. Mm-hmm. History. That's history. History is always written from a certain perspective. It's always in a certain there's a certain look. I can't find the exact words in English, but that we try to keep it. How should I say it? As open-minded as possible. Mm-hmm. We, for example, when we were working on the Tatars, we reached out to some universities from the region. Mm-hmm. Tatar, in the sense of the Middle Ages, that country is no longer around. So we were looking for universities in the regions, reached out to them, read research papers from PhD students as well, went to a lot of libraries. It's a lot of good old-fashioned research in there, to be honest. Yeah. And which is actually good fun. I mean, you can start from Wikipedia, but after that, you really need to go to get down and dirty with actual proper research that you can find all over the world. And that's kind of how we can fine-tune those civs further. Now, at that point, once we have a lot of information to work from, then at that point it's more like, okay, we're still making a video game here. We're not just making a history book, because that's obvious. We're making a video game for people to enjoy, and that's kind of where you have to say, okay, we need to make decisions. For example, we have the Kumans that we just added to the game. The Kumans, they got extinct before most of the civilization in Age of Empires were around. Does that mean that this civilization needs to, stop being relevant as you advance through the game? Yeah, probably not, because then the game will be completely unbalanced. So that's kind of where you also need to weigh gameplay versus history at that point.
Man, how did it feel to sort of walk in the footsteps of the original Age of Empires devs in terms of building and adding new factions? Like, you're sort of sitting there going, we're embarking on the same mission that they did in the 1990s, but we're doing it, with the tools available to us, in a much faster internet, for one.
Yes.
In modern day.
It was interesting because I've read some interviews about them and how they kind of went around that, and I can't imagine how they would have to go to like more obscure SIPs, because sometimes it was like, okay, we had the children's books that we worked from, or we had some articles from magazines and we cut those out, and that was kind of a reference art. Those are things that I wrote, that I read in old interviews from Ensemble Studios.
Mm-hmm.
And now with the wealth of information that we have on the internet and the ability to just say like, okay, I'm gonna, send an email to the University of Istanbul to get some research on Central Asian history. That is something that we now can do and they could not. So in a way, I really appreciate the work that they did back in the day, in researching that with the tools that they had available.
Right on. King 3500 actually has a really good question. Is there still space in human history you could tell in new campaigns or civs?
At this point, we added 35 civilizations to the game, which is a crazy amount. There is still more. Is that gonna come to Age of Empires? I don't know. We've been saying for a while now that for civilizations, we're probably good. We don't really expect to add more civilizations. Never say never, but we don't really expect it at this point. But for campaigns, there's loads of stories to tell.
Mm-hmm.
We actually went through the campaigns, all of them actually. We kind of remade and repolished them where necessary. I mean, you just played the Saladin mission. That one is still very, very familiar to the old Saladin, but there were missions that we completely overhauled or completely replaced with new ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then we noticed like, okay, we have Aztecs, and we're talking and we're telling stories about the Franks, Joan of Arc and William Wallace, and there's so many stories that we told, but then we noticed, we never really told stories about the Vikings or the Chinese or the Japanese. And it's like, those have very rich history and a lot of interesting stories to tell, but they're not told yet in Age of Empires 2 at least.
Right on. Moving on to that point. Okay, let me dive into my question basket here for a second. Let's briefly talk then about working with Microsoft. You mentioned earlier that the company was able to provide a lot of QA and localization support when you checked in with them in Seattle. What was it like as a small to mid-sized team, like working with a larger company that in this case owned the IP, obviously? Like, sort of, how did you build a working relationship with them, and what do you think other developers should know about opportunities like this to work with, companies that are open to handing their IP over to you?
Where to start? So I have to say we've gone through quite a few cooperations with Microsoft over the years. Like, we started with like the mod and importing that to be an official product. And at that point, Age of Empires was still, at that point, it didn't have that much attention internally at Microsoft. Because there was nothing in Age of Empires for quite a few years at that point. So there was no massive team supporting it. But these things have really changed lately. If you look at, well, they just opened a new studio just to support Age of Empires. So those are things that really show, okay, now you're working with a bigger group. But really, the best advice I think I could give is like, be humble, like listen and look around. They're a big company. Microsoft has been around for ages. We're very, very lucky to be supported by a team that has been around for quite some time as well. They have so much experience. Like we have people who worked on Halo in the past. We have people who worked on KI, like so many games, also RTS games in the past. And that really, really helps. Like these guys know what they're doing. And being with them, like, okay, we might know the game better, working on it, but they know so many other things. And it's more about like, getting the best from each other. And that's also what's good about our working relationship with Microsoft at the moment. They absolutely recognize, okay, you guys really know Age of Empires. Please do your thing. We will be supporting you guys with all the experience that we have to offer, and it's a very nice working relationship in that sense.
Right on. I'm going to give a quick shout out for it's the bottom of the hour. We are going to be talking with Bert for about another 30 minutes. We would love to take your questions from chat. We've heard from folks like Lurker Sauce and King 3500, but if you have questions about the making of Age of Empire 2 Definitive Edition, we would love to ask them on your behalf. Excuse me a second. Sorry, dealing with a cold and trying to stream video games is very difficult. Bert, let's talk about, I guess, like you mentioned yourself, as a team of modders, you were sort of lucky to get to come together and make content for a game that was popular 20 years ago, and now you get to revitalize it and refresh it for the same community and keep it alive today. What has been your team's approach to continuing that mod support for other users? Because obviously Age of Empires still has a really good built-in modding tool. It has an online mod community. What has been your approach in that respect to letting people take the Age of Empires 2 tools and go buck wild with them?
All right, so yeah, there's a lot, and the thing is, like, the modding community just doesn't stop, right? Like, even as we're talking, there's probably new stuff in development and new things going on. And that was also a challenge when we made the Definitive Edition. Like, okay, the mods tools that were being constantly developed were actually developed for the old game, and at the same time we were making the Definitive Edition. And like every month we were like, okay, this new modding tool came out, or this thing just came from the community. How can we ensure that this gets finds its way to the and that is also more of an ongoing story, actually, because at this point, Microsoft has also said, like, hey, we're not done with Age of Empires 2. Like, we just released the game, but now we're going to support it for quite some time. Because we definitely noticed that there's so many people playing, the game is so big, you can support this for quite some time if you want to. So that's kind of what we're doing now. So in modding tools, we're not there yet. We're still working on it, actually. We actually have a patch coming out next week. I don't think we have shared the exact date yet, but next week we have a very big patch coming out where we will be focusing more on fixes for the audio modding, for example. So there was a lot of people in the community like trying around with audio mods, and they were like, okay, this can be better, this can be improved, and we took that advice and we implemented that. So that's kind of what we're trying to do at this point, because we recognize it as well. We come from the modding community, and we want to make sure that spirit stays around as much as possible. As time allows, we will continue doing that and providing tools. But with that said, like, when we ship the game, we already included some of our dev tools into the package. So people who really want to get nitty-gritty with things, they can just go to the tools folder and look around there. And if they have any questions about that, just ask in the Discord and or in the on the forums, and I'm quite sure somebody will get to it.
Right on. I'm gonna. Lurker Sauce was actually funny enough just asking about the audio mod support, and just to follow up on their question for them, is it MP3 or Wave support for that tool?
It's actually WEM. It's a specific format,
Uh-huh.
but we did make the whole process a bit easier. I'm judging from his questions, it seems like he has been diving into that quite a bit. He definitely read the modding guide there, but that guide will be a lot more relevant once patch comes out next week.
Right on. Okay, moving on from modding. What does it feel like when you're updating this kind of game? You're updating a game that kind of has the, and you're balancing gameplay for something that has just kind of the deathmatch mode, the mode where everyone's just competing, and you don't just win by sometimes beating other players, but by completing monuments and such. How sometimes the content you're making has to be sort of for the campaign, which is for mission driven content. For updating this kind of content and then creating and adding new things for it, what's been your approach to make sure that something works across all the different game modes of Age of Empires, so that it works for players who just want that classic experience, or who want something new and something that they can sort of cook up themselves, I guess, if that question makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. You actually just described half of the discussions that we always have within the team. No, it's actually something that's very, very common. We often run into issues like, okay, we have this new unit and it looks really cool, and our team is really happy with it, and we're like, okay, what can we do with the unit? The campaign team is like, yeah, we want it there, and then we're thinking, oh, can we also just put it in the normal game? And then we're like, no, because then the balance will be broken. So that there's constantly we're thinking about those things, and it's something that you see very, very often actually. Like, okay, this small tweak in behavior might work in this instance, but it will break something completely seemingly unrelated in another part of the game. Now, as said before, like a lot of the people on the team come from the Age of Empires community, so we were usually quite quick in catching those things, which really helped us a lot. Like when we were discussing, okay, can we, I'm trying to find a good example here now. For example, if you do an AI update where you say, okay, we have units that kind of kite back and forth, trying to evade projectiles, that's something that we can add, and it makes the game a lot more harder, especially on the higher levels. And you might think, okay, that's interesting to add, like you have that kiting behavior that you see a lot of expert players do. Can we put that in the AI? And then we put it in, and then we see, okay, the AI can now use it. The AI is now much harder, but it's not necessarily more fun, and especially for more casual players, it's just downright annoying. And then you're like, okay, that's not a good addition, even though it technically makes the AI better. But yeah, better is not always, better for everyone. So that's one of those practical examples where, yeah, you have to look at everything that goes on in the game. And Age of Empires 2 is a massive game. We noticed that while working on it. And it's not just the game mechanics, it's also that we're working on a game with history. And we're kind of telling, people's history. But for a lot of people, it's also like, this is their heritage, this is their background, this is their country. And people can want to make sure that that is represented in a correct way or in an interesting way. And if you go way off track there, then people understandably see like, hey, why do you represent my country like this? It was never like that. So there's also a historical caution that you need to exercise there.
Man, I didn't even think we'd get to that line of questioning today, because forgive me, I had limited understanding of the nature of the DE work here. I guess I'm going to dive into that a little bit. And I'm just going to sort of get to brass tacks, which is, you're European. You and your colleagues, I'm sure, hail from a host of different countries. I myself an American. I mentioned earlier in the stream how I was thankful to Age of Empires for helping me learn a little bit about civilizations from far across the globe. What, I guess, it's so hard to ask. What did you learn when you stepped into working on civs that were based outside of Europe, and how did you sort of avoid making those mistakes that can lead to them being stereotyped or boiled down into something that doesn't represent them? It's hard to just say how and expect that to cover everything, but it's sort of the only question I can ask is how did you approach that sensitively and make it fun and compelling without sort of only making it happen from a Western perspective. But it's going to happen from a Western perspective anyway, because that's your background. Like, that's sort of all you can do.
In a way, yes, and in a way, we also kind of need to recognize that Age of Empires has always been a bit of a Hollywood version of history.
Yeah.
Like it's very much like the basis is history. Everybody starts from history, and that's kind of what the whole game starts from. But indeed, there is some representations that would say that's more Hollywood than realism. Not completely, of course. I don't want to say like we do a lot of good historical research, and sometimes if our historical team is watching a movie, they're like, Jesus, what are these guys doing? 15th century helmets in a 8th century spectacle. That doesn't make sense. So that's kind of the level that we try to go for. Where was I? Right. How do we look at that? It's kind of something that we kind of talked about earlier. So we just doing history and trying to go to find sources outside the sources that we have available. So instead of going for the children's book or going for the the local library, try to reach out to a university from that area.
Yeah.
A lot of people speak English now. They're very, very happy to help. Age of Empires is a very international brand as well, and if you reach out to a university in Peru, for example, and you ask them something about Age of Empires, they're like, oh yeah, Age of Empires. Like it's not just known in USA and then Europe, it's known all over the world. And a lot of people are very enthusiastic to help on that and to kind of help them represent their country and their culture in the game. And then you often also get questions like, hey, you kind of represent the game or a certain thing that happened in history in the game in a certain way. And they will be like, hey, but that's maybe not the best way to do it. And then you can say, okay, can we adapt that? Can we make changes there? So yeah, there's a lot of iteration in that sense as well.
Yeah, man. There's that whole field. I'm envious in a specific way. That's like such a great challenge to tackle. Like you get to celebrate other people's history and culture, while also just like it's fun. Age of Empires is fun. Like getting to getting to tackle the challenge of like doing that deep dive research while bringing them part of the community. I guess it sounds like a good time. Like, hey, you guys get to come to the table now.
Yeah, exactly, and that's also what a lot of people love, and usually that's also where we get the most fierce feedback from, like, oh, we now added your history and your civilization to the game. You can expect a lot of people from those countries all of a sudden reaching out to you, like, hey, this and this and this and this, or this is great, or that is something that is probably a bit weird. But usually we try to anticipate that as much as possible, of course.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a fun example from way back. I think one of the first campaigns, we were looking at a new civilization. Like, okay, we're gonna add a new campaign for the civilization. And we're like, okay, this guy had an interesting story to tell. And then we asked at the local community or the people from that country to get some ideas. And they were like, oh, that's kind of like our local Hitler. You don't want to glorify that guy. And we're like, okay, then we won't. So yeah, it can be tricky, but that's also a perfect example of showing like, okay, what is shown here in Western history is limited, or is a very limited or a different perspective, and you need to be careful with that.
Right on. Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard about Age of Empires, sort of to give credit to the original team, was from a writer named Latoya Peterson. I saw her speaking at IndieCade, and she was talking about how the Age of Conquerors campaign, like the first campaign you dive into, is the Incans or Aztecs.
Yes, Aztecs, yes.
Aztecs, thank you. Yeah. And how the Aztecs fought off Spanish conquerors, and in her perspective, she said that's such an interesting perspective for a game to center, especially given how Age of Empires sort of celebrates. It's fair to say Age of Empires celebrates like the technological advancement of European nations a lot. Once in this game it gets exciting once gunpowder and horseback riding get added to the mix, and you feel like you're a stronger civilization. But to have Age of Empires be a game that took another, this nation and sort of put them on even footing with the Spanish from a gameplay perspective and say, hey, this is the story of their resistance and their perseverance against a conquering group. Her perspective on that was super. I already enjoyed that campaign so much when I played this when I was younger, and I thought her take on it was really good.
Yeah, indeed. I think we added like 3 new campaigns with Definitive Edition.
Yeah. And
all 3 of them have like a very, very different approach to like the story we want to tell. Like I think one is about just conquest.
Yeah.
It was a good story, so we were like, okay, it's just about conquest, but it's such a good story, we just need to do it.
Yeah.
And then there was one about like, basically a people that was about to be extinct.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's very, very different kind of approaches that we all want to tell.
Yeah, I guess come to think of it, as both a designer and a modder, I want to ask your perspective on one thing. Age of Empires is a really good, RTS war game. Like, it's great when you want to build an army, build the most advanced army, play rock, paper, scissors with your opponents and figure out what's good against what. How, as a designer, do you make Age of Empires fun when players just kind of want to do what I'm doing here and focus on building a town and making, sort of blend into the economic or wonder victories of the game, the more peaceful alternatives, which isn't to say like the peace side is inherently better or anything, just more like my favorite thing in Age of Empires was always just sitting and fiddling with my toy soldiers, I guess, more than it was like diving into other people's territories and screwing up their stuff. I guess, how do you make Age of Empires fun across those different game modes? Playstyle.
Okay, this is the first time I'm getting this question, and I love it. So, so this is really interesting, because when we design new content and a new civilization, there's I think a lot of before I get to that, first of all, like, big credit to the original developers for making a game that has this kind of incredibly interesting learning curve. Like, you can be an absolute pro and enjoy the game in a very different way, or you can be very casual, just play and build a city and still have the same amount of fun. And that's the absolute beauty of Age of Empires. So when we started working on new civs, we always, the balance that we eventually want to go for and the gameplay that we eventually want to go for needs to be suitable for the absolute top players. Like, they need to be able to play it, it needs to be balanced for them. But then at the same time, we're like, okay, we have new mechanics, new units. Are they also fun for people who just want to mess around a bit, have some fun? Because then we were like, okay, for example, a unit that has, let's say they have extra visibility range. That can be a strong bonus for expert players, but a more casual player will be like, I don't care about that. That's like nothing. For my play style as a casual player, just seeing a bit further adds absolutely nothing. And then you're like, okay, it might be interesting for a certain group, but absolutely not for a different group.
Right.
And a lot of the bonuses we kind of iterate like that. Like, okay, it might be technically a good bonus, but for a lot of people, it's just not fun, and then it just goes out. So yeah, it's definitely something that is very present, and it's actually interesting. It's the first time I get the question, but it's such a big part of the development of new civilization.
Hey, I'm happy that our questions are that good. We have 10 minutes left, about 10 minutes left, maybe a little less depending on how we go, but we're going to try and wrap things up by the top of the next hour. If you've got questions for Bert, drop them in chat. I'll ask them. We'd love to have them. For myself, I guess I might as well ask, there have been a lot of changes in conventions for how people interact with RTS games. That's kind of a UI UX question is where I'm sort of bringing this to. Is I was super surprised when I booted this up and the menu was really faithful to what I remembered Age of Empires 2 being. I was then confounded by the problem of, oh, right, I don't know where to research my new technologies, because I forgot that in Age of Empires, the tech tree is not just a thing you dive into and tell something to research, because I've been playing Civ and Age of Wonders and all these other games. You have to go to the buildings and research them as you unlock tier by tier. With that said, how did you sort of deal with the concept of changes in menus? Like, how did you sort of preserve the old game while making sure it followed like modern menu logic, I guess?
Yeah, that was another big challenge because we noticed that, especially in UI flow, the Age of Empires did not evolve in the last 20 years at all. So we had some catching up to do, but at the same time, we don't want to alienate older players, existing community, but also there's a lot of UI that's just inherent to the gameplay. Like you said, like your technologies are researched in buildings, not in the tech tree. The tech tree here in Age of Empires is more informative rather than interactive. And in that sense, a lot of the UI improvements we did was more looking at, okay, what do modern RTS games offer, and what do we not have? And then we noticed a lot of things that were completely missing. RTS games are a lot about management, about resource management, unit management, town management. Like everything is management and oversight. And then we noticed, like, okay, Age of Empires just doesn't have that much information that you actually should have. A quick example. I mean, there's a few things that you can see on the screen right now. You're making a monk right now, and right after that, you're researching a technology. In the past, you could not do that. You could only do one at a time, and you would have to come back to your building afterwards to do that. At the same time, like if you click on that monastery, you will see that there's two bars on top of it. One is the bar which is just your HP, and then one is a bar that shows like how the progress is of that specific technology. So it's like little things that help you in seeing what's going on in your empire without the need to constantly click around the whole time. So our approach was like, okay, less time fighting the UI and more time fighting your opponent. That was really the big approach that we tried to take.
Right on. You can see me in the stream starting to do one of my favorite things, which was build a wall around my territory. I don't know why. It was always just nice, and it helped me organize my space, I think I felt like. I will grab one of Lurkersauce's questions from chat. This is kind of a technical question. How did you guys write, or excuse me, did you all write how things rendered so that they don't take up much space before? Like before, all units would be rendered on the map. That did not matter where you moved your view. They wonder how the compression was done to have it to 50%. So I guess that's the question: is how did you change how the game rendered? Because we were talking earlier about the large file size for the game. For context.
Yeah, so the renderer is completely new actually. So in the past we had I think we had 265 colors in total for everything. So units, terrains, water, player colors, all of that was displayed with just 265 colors. Now we also noticed the reason that Age of Empires 2 was so efficient was because it only had 265 colors. So that made the assets very, very, very small. It's like comparing a GIF or a GIF, I don't even know how to pronounce it, to a PNG. The amount of colors is just staggeringly different. And that's kind of, but then we have the issue, okay, we have a DE version, we need to have more than 265 colors. So what we did then was create specific palettes of 265 colors per asset. Which means that the color space is so much bigger, but we still have that efficiency from the old compression. Like we can still compress to a certain extent while having a much greater quality, just by doing per asset palettes. Sorry.
Right on. That hopefully makes sense for people who understand that technology. I am more of a writer than a programmer, unfortunately. And before we go, I will grab Hiwata's question. Thanks for dropping by, Hiwata. What does the future look like for spectator mode for the game? They also asked, has that been asked already? No, it's not been asked. Are you guys working on a spectator mode? I should have looked this up beforehand. Are you working on a spectator mode? And if so, how's it going? And what does it take to implement a spectator mode?
Yes, so there is a spectator mode in the game. You can go to a lobby which currently showcases all the games that are currently being played in multiplayer. Now there is still more work that can be done on that. Just like I said before, like the modding tools, there can be some more effort and work done on improving that side of the game. But the same for spectator mode. There is much more that you can do with that, and it's one of those things where again we have this example of the community working alongside while the DE was in development. Like all of a sudden there were big spectator tools specifically for the old version, and you're like, okay, that is amazing. That's currently not in DE, so what are we going to do with that? So that's one of those things that we're just going to keep on looking at and see where we end up. But as said before, we do have a lot of support currently going on for Age of Empires 2, and we will keep on adding to this game. And spectator mode, I'm quite sure there will be improvements to that as well. Actually, next week there will already be improvements to that, mostly bug fixing, but anything that helps in making a better spectator experience is a plus at this point.
Oh man, that's actually Mill. Funny enough, Mill is asking a question that sort of involves my wrap up. Mill wants to know if you and the Age of Empires team will be at GDC at all next year.
I have no idea. That is all Microsoft decision, and I'm at this point blissfully unaware of anything.
That's fine. That actually helps me start wrapping things up. This has been another stream on the Game Developers Conference Twitch channel. Thank you all for coming out today, everyone. Thank you to the Age of Empires 2 community for coming out. Thank you to all the interested game developers who dropped by. And I guess there's a lot of overlap between the two when you come down to it. Hi, Wada, to answer your question this went up in chat. Yes, this will go up on YouTube. You can watch the entire archive on YouTube or Twitch later this afternoon. If you enjoyed watching the stream and you're new to our channel, we would love to have you follow us because we go live regularly with interviews with really great and interesting game developers, big and small. We've had AAA devs on the channel. We've had great indies on the channel. We've everyone from Insomniac Games to the folks from Night in the Woods. It's been a great year on this channel. I'm really thankful for everyone who's dropped by and watched. And next year, we're going to keep doing some amazing stuff. The holidays start ramping up for us, so this is actually might end up being our last stream of 2019, but that's fine. We will be doing stuff in the new year as we get closer to GDC. If you yourself are a game developer or interested in game development and want to go to GDC, you can scroll down and click on the Register for GDC button and get more info about passes and prices for next year's show, which is from March 16th to March 20th. If you're going to register for GDC, I'm obligated to tell you that now is the best time to do it because early pricing will go up in January, I believe. Other than that, that's about it. Bert, if they have questions about the making of Age of Empires 2, where should they ask, or Definitive Edition specifically, where should they ask them?
Most of the communication is actually through the official Age of Empires Discord, but if you have more questions for specifically, or for me specifically, you can also go to Twitter, Age of Empires, Forgotten Empires, or just my own handle, which is CisionDE. That might not make it to them, but yeah, we're pretty open to the community. We come from the community, we're pretty open to them. I like to chat with them, so yeah, any place will usually work. The forums, there's an Age of Empires 2 subreddit as well. Like, community is so big, your answers you'll find the answers somewhere probably.
Right on with that. Have a good day, everyone, and have a happy holiday if you are planning to have one. Bye.